Morning, everybody, and welcome to this Thursday morning's webinar. I'm Chloe Tetcher. I'm the health coach here with Ready Care. And for this morning, we're going to be looking at the topic of self-compassion for health and for well-being, which is something that throughout my time working with clients is a topic that comes up quite often as to something that clients themselves feel that they need to cultivate a little bit more. And I've had a few comments over the weeks, even at the end, if I ever mention self-compassion, that some of you can identify with the necessity for self-compassion. So the focus I'd like to do for today is really look at self-compassion in terms of the link with the physiological aspect of health and well-being, as well as the kind of mindset and brain aspects, and how can cultivating self-compassion actually bring us towards some of our health goals. So what is self-compassion? A lot of us might have heard the term, but I think it's important to do a little bit of a redefinition when we're chatting about anything. So basically, it's a concept in which we cultivate a kind and caring relationship with ourselves. It involves the same degree of understanding and support to ourselves that we would naturally tend to offer to a loved one or a friend in times of difficulty. So treating ourselves like we would a good friend, talking to ourselves like we would a good friend. From this perspective of the brain and psychology, it gives us an understanding of the transformative potential that self-compassion can have in how we actually approach specific changes in lifestyle dietary habits. It's not the same as self-esteem. And I think sometimes there's a little bit of confusion with that in how we regard self-compassion. So self-esteem is usually contingent of some sort of external factor like successes, achievements, social comparisons. Are we like that person, not like that person? The esteem is usually fed, quote unquote, fed by approval from others, whereas self-compassion is usually self-directed. It's more stable. Once it's cultivated, it's more stable, and it's a more unconditional source of self-worth. In other words, it does not depend on external validation. Once we've strengthened up that muscle, for want of a better term, of self-compassion, it doesn't really matter what's happening on the outside. We have a very, very grounded, very steady knowledge of ourselves and our own kind of approach and relationship to ourselves. So it is not dependent on a success or a failure. And it really looks at accepting the flaws and the imperfections that we have as part of being a human being, being a person, being somebody that does not need to meet a certain criteria to actually be fully whole. So there is a researcher that, for those of you interested in looking up a bit more about, her name is Kristen Neff, and she's a really good book that I'll pop in at the end. So she would have done a lot of studies, and there's quite a number of lectures and talks that she would have done, and she really looks at the impact of self-compassion on various aspects of well-being and health. So in a 2003 study, Neff found that individuals with higher levels of self-compassion tend to have a greater experience of life satisfaction, which, you know, at the end of the day, is pretty important. Their happiness levels tend to be higher, and they have much better psychological well-being with a better positive attitude towards themselves, and greater sense of resilience, which is something that we hear an awful lot, especially in workplaces, organizations at the moment, is that topic of resilience and our ability to face challenges and setbacks. Because if we think of it with our kind of prefrontal cortex activated, or zooming out picture, if we're able to have an unshaken belief in and ability to not be wobbled by setbacks, not be wobbled by failures, not be stressed out by our own self-criticism, our performance tends to be more stable. We tend to get over setbacks a lot quicker, and we tend to adapt to change a lot better. So it also encourages interconnectedness. What we're doing when we practice self-compassion, and I talked about it as a muscle, but it should be thought of as a practice. anything to do with the brain that we repeat and that we're learning, that we're expanding and growing, it makes it a lot easier. If we think back of some of the chats we'd had around beliefs, for example, anything we practice consistently in the brain, consistently in our being, becomes a lot easier to access. So when we're looking at that self-empathy piece, when we're looking at placing things in perspective, when we're looking at having a measured, balanced approach towards challenges and setbacks, it develops our internal sense of emotional intelligence, and it develops our internal sense of empathy. And when we have greater empathy, we're able to view through that particular lens the relationships that we have with others. It's a lot easier for us to understand another person if we have been able to try on that hat before, if we're able to see, oh, I had a really bad day last week and I know my performance was a bit affected, and that's fine. That's being human. And you could have a coworker that given day that performs a little bit under their usual standard, for example, and rather than be very stuck in the project and goal outcomes that the performance might be offsetting, you're very able to, especially if you're a manager, for example, you're very able to put that in perspective of everybody has bad days, everybody has setbacks, which creates a much more interconnected lattice of community, of social interconnectedness. And that is a feedback loop. That's a very positive feedback loop. When your connections are better, your overall life satisfaction gets higher, your overall health and well-being follow up with that. So let's have a look from a behavioral standpoint. What is happening? Zoop. What we're looking at is it's more likely, you are more likely when you have that internal facet of self-compassion. If you believe yourself to be worthy of something not based on external metrics, you're much likelier to self-promote healthier lifestyle choices. So it would bring in individuals a motivation by a desire to support their own well-being and take actions that align with their long-term health goals. In terms of behavior, that self-compassion encourages individuals to engage in health-promoting behaviors. So if you think about it, that compassion, that care that you would extend to a friend, a family member, that goes a lot beyond, the immediacy of what life throws at you. You're more likely to go, okay, what is good for me? What's actually good for me? And the example I would give is, how much can you take on that day without it starting to not be good for you anymore? If those external metrics of self-esteem, let's say, are no longer into play, and it's more about that compassionate thing of, can I take on that much? Am I stretching myself beyond the point of kindness? And I think kindness is a very underrated value that we have in our society, that we've all been on the receiving end of kindness when we're having a particularly stressful period of our lives, and what that can feel like, that refuge that can have in somebody else. And if we're able to cultivate that for ourselves, making decisions that align with long-term health goals will be a lot easier. Health promoting behaviors will come a lot easier, because we will feel we deserve to be healthy. We deserve to have our bodies function in a way that brings us energy and joy and autonomy and fun and freedom and all of those things. And it no longer becomes associated with a punishment. When we believe that we're worthy of these types of self-care activities like exercise, nutrition, sleep, we deserve sleep, and promoting stress management techniques that will foster a nurturing attitude towards oneself. And then self-care will become an essential aspect of that maintenance of health and well-being. It will also help from a physiological standpoint. I'll change my little tag now. There we go. So that there's some semblance of structure. It helps from a physiological aspect in a very real way by counteracting the negative impacts of stress. So when we're faced with challenging situations, people that have a high level of self-compassion respond with self-kindness and understanding rather than self-criticism. And although that seems like a mindset issue, which we'll have a look at in a while, let's have a look really at what we already know stress causes. And all of us would have heard this at some point in our lives, that stress is one of the massive, massive word gone. It's one of the huge blocks towards disease, cardiovascular health going downwards, depression going up, anxiety going up, all of the aspects that really can lead to a very, very physical breakdown in how we're able to show up in life. The stress response, so the adaptive response of self-compassion will reduce stress levels and will stop that kind of chronic stress on physical health. It activates what's called the parasympathetic nervous system. So you have your sympathetic nervous system and you have a parasympathetic nervous system. And contrary to what you might think, the sympathetic nervous system actually is sympathetic to your survival. So sympathetic to your survival means if you come up against a stressful scenario, it activates the fight or flight. It activates your cortisol levels go up, which can help you to, let's say, think a little bit faster in the short term, be able to move a little bit faster, all of those kind of how stress would be adaptive, evolutionary, and in our lives at the moment. Parasympathetic then is the flip side of that. It's relaxation. It's not having a surplus of cortisol. It's more tied with promoting states of calm and well-being. So self-compassion helps to activate that parasympathetic nervous system, which will bring down your stress response. And that's exceedingly important if you look at the chronic effects of elevated cortisol levels. The parasympathetic nervous system being activated will cause a reduction. Sorry, I have hair in my eye now. My own cortisol levels will be going up in a second. That'll where was I? Oh yeah, it'll reduce your heart rate. It'll reduce your blood pressure. It'll reduce your stress hormone levels, and it'll create a more favorable environment for healing and rejuvenation by bringing down that fight or flight, which is designed to kind of get all of your resources mobilized and prepare for the immediate kind of run from the lion or fight the lion if you're feeling that way inclined. It can be adaptive if you need to have a very quick response. You know, people have that adrenaline surge in crisis where they're able to I don't know, lift a door off a loved one if a door has fallen on a loved one. But it really, when you have that persistent activation of the sympathetic sympathetic nervous system, it does do the inverse. So it has the elevated heart rate, it has the elevated blood pressure, it has the heightened stress hormones like cortisol, and these can contribute to lots of health problems along the way, like your cardiovascular disease. Weakened immune function is one where people are in a period of chronic stress and burnout. They'll be finding that they're catching coughs and colds. They're picking up everything that's going. It can also impair digestive function, because if you're running from a lion, for example, or I don't know, somebody on the street with a machete or whatever a modern day version of that is, your body will say, okay, we need all of the blood to go from where it would usually go to really power our getaway here, and digestive function tends to go down, which is why as well, sorry, now I'm picking up my eye like the new time here. when somebody is having chronic stress, it can show up as digestive difficulties as well. Sleep disturbances, impaired cognitive functioning. So really, at the heart of that is, if we're looking to maintain from a physiological perspective optimal health and well-being, it is important to have that parasympathetic nervous system being activated, which helps to counterbalance basically any of those things mentioned. So you have self-compassion, deep breathing, meditation, mindfulness, they all help to activate that parasympathetic nervous system and reduce that negative impact of the chronic stress. That self-compassion influences the brain as well as the body. So it releases something called oxytocin. So oxytocin can be released when we hug another individual. It can be released through moments of social bonding, and it's been called the bonding hormone. It promotes feelings of trust, connection, and well-being when it's with another, but actually with ourselves as well. So actually taking some time to sit down and give yourself those 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever you have time for, to go into breathing exercise, to even listen to some guided meditation. If you find it difficult to slow your mind down by yourself, there's tons of videos out there. Just talk yourself down, get into that parasympathetic state, get into that self-compassion state, and that releases oxytocin for yourself as well, and that deepens your self-trust, your self-connection, and your well-being. So let's have a look at the mindset piece of it as well. Which, like, this is the kind of part that I would see an awful lot with clients. Basically, when there's any lifestyle and dietary changes, and when people say they need to be a little bit more self-compassionate, they need to exercise a bit more compassion towards themselves, what they're usually talking about is reduced self-criticism. So that's when we have that self-criticism mindset, it can really set back our efforts, and it can make us hone in on particular mistakes. Shifting that allows individuals to respond with kindness, self-acceptance, rather than harsh judgment. And that reduces feelings of guilt and shame, which can hinder progress and kind of feed back into a negative feedback loop of self-sabotage. And for you guys that would have heard the belief talk out of them before, the little series, what's actually happening there is you are associating a particular behavior. You might remember this from the chat we had. You're associating a particular behavior when you're undertaking lifestyle dietary changes, and your self-critic is very, very loud. What's happening there is it's usually quite negative emotional associations. And if you can remember about that whole piece, when we try to undertake specific habit changes and our brain associates them with things like guilt, shame, not feeling good enough, you'll never be able to do this, remember when you tried and you couldn't, all of this kind of self-talk. There starts to be an enmeshment with the task and feelings of, oh, I don't like this. It makes me feel bad. So your being and yourself are always trying to protect you from feelings, negative feelings. So what you can find is when there is a high degree of self-criticism with a task, you tend to cultivate avoidant behaviors more so than you usually would. You tend to make excuses for not wanting to do the thing. You tend to avoid it. You tend to not want to think about it, because suddenly, as soon as you think about, oh, I was supposed to go to the gym, and and all of those kind of internal negative emotions are being piqued, you start to go into self-criticism mode. The perfectionist starts coming out and goes, I should be doing this, I should be doing that, I should be going 3 times a week, I should be exercising on my days off, I should be downloading videos, I should be tracking, I should, and all of a sudden you're incredibly overwhelmed, and basically you feel awful about the task. You feel awful about what you've done versus not done. You're absolutely cultivating what's known as black and white thinking, which is the killer of adaptation and change. Black and white thinking is basically when you go all good, all bad. I am all good, all bad. My behavior, all good or all bad. Today I'm a good girl. Today I was very bad with my food choices. And when those words start to sneak in, things like good, bad, always, never, these kind of very polarizing thought process, that's a really good indication that you're entering black and white thinking. And the major problem with black and white thinking is it evolves in a scenario where there's no nuance, there's no good enough, there's no efforts. There's no patting yourself on the back for what you did do. It has to be to this idealized, perfected version of who you are if you had no other engagements, no job, the highest amount of energy, no stressors. That type of performance is what you're striving for in black and white thinking. And nothing outside of that matches. So you will always fall short of this kind of always. Yeah, one falls short of this type of idealized version because it's not sustainable, and it's not realistic. And when you're setting yourself up to an unrealistic standard day in, day out, and you're criticizing yourself for not being able to attain that, it's really setting yourself up for disaster, really. It's setting yourself up for not having a good time with the new changes that you're undertaking. It's setting yourself up for really removing yourself from what is important about why you want to do those things. And it becomes very, very viewed through the lens of negativity. And as we spoke about, when we view an activity through the lens of negativity, we are more likely to want to avoid it, more likely to want to avoid the bad feelings it brings up in us. So when we have, on the flip side, when we do have the self-compassion around it, it reduces that self-critical voice. Someone's like, oh, thank God, that can go away for a while. If we focus on what we did do right, if we focus on all of the positive choices that we've made that day, whatever they might be, and take some time to list them out for yourself. You might have not got your massive tick list of tasks and goals done, but what did you do? Brilliant. You got a few steps in the direction that you want to go. And what we're always looking for positive change is progress, not perfection. Give it what you can do that day realistically, and give yourself the praise and the affirmation that you did do the things and you're moving in the right direction. And tie it back to the fact that this is not just about getting the task done. you know Going to the gym is not about going to the gym. Essentially, going to the gym, for me, for example, or for individuals, can be about I want to be able to utilize my body to the best of its ability. And that's what's important about the task. Whether I ticked the list that day or not, am I moving towards gaining strength? Am I moving towards gaining flexibility? Am I moving towards developing a better relationship with what my body is capable of doing day in, day out? And it's about tweaking those things a little bit when you're practicing self-compassion, and not focusing on the direct task and goal at hand, and putting the kind of knife edge of everything rests on that one task. Are there other things that you did that day? Brilliant. It also encourages flexibility and moderation. And I can't stress this enough. How important that is towards a sustainable, long-term lifestyle change. Moderation and flexibility have got to come into the picture, because our world is not rigid. Our lives are not rigid. And what's that little story about? You have a very rigid tree and you have a little bush in the wind. And when there's a very, very high wind, if the tree is totally rigid, if a gust comes that's high enough, it'll knock that tree over, no matter how strong it seems to be, because of how rigid it is. Whereas the little bush that can flutter in the wind will adapt. And we're looking to be able to adapt to scenarios. We're looking to be able to adapt to unforeseen circumstances, and have that be part of our ability to manage change. Flexibility and moderation are the flip side of black and white thinking. The black and white thinking and that rigidity will lead to strict rules, all or nothing approach to food and your exercise routine, or whatever that change may be. Whereas self-compassion encourages individuals to adopt that more flexible and moderate mindset, recognizing that those particular choices exist on a spectrum, and that occasional, indulgences or occasional deviations from quote unquote perfection are normal, acceptable, and part of being a human being. So self-compassion allows those instances to be part of a balanced approach to your goals, lifestyle, dietary needs, changes, whatever they might be. Flexibility and enjoyment have to be part of your long-term plan, because if they aren't, you're going to have a bad time. And you'll have planned directly to have a bad time. So you might be very unplanned, but it's when those aspects of it are not cultivated in your goals, and when that self-compassion and understanding of moderation isn't in the long-term goals, that it becomes an issue. So I'll wrap up for today, because I am oh yeah, the lady that I'd mentioned was Christine Neff. She's got a book called Self-Compassion: The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. And that look at exploring self-compassion from the physiological aspect and the practical perspectives as well, for those that feel that they need to have a little bit more of it in their lives. Okay, we have a comment here. I'll just show. Michael, hi Chloe, I feel finding the right balance for self-criticism is okay if you don't go too far with finding perfection every day. You need a bit of self-criticism, and that's true, a little bit. Again, moderation. A little bit is good, and that's it. It's the moderate of, can I do this a little bit better? Yes. Am I comfortable with my performance to date? I would like it to be a bit better, but I accept that what I did brought me towards where I need to be. I do agree that if we're striving for growth and perfection, maybe it's the terminology, it's the definition of criticism is, can we course correct? Can we adapt? Can we grow? Can we stretch a bit more? Those kind of wordings oftentimes can retain the analytical approach to our performances, to our days, to how we approach our tasks, but it has a kind of different nuance than criticism. Criticism, it's like positive critique is always something, definitely. If anybody else would like to add into the chat, thanks a million for that, Michael. Appreciate it. If anybody else would like to pop in a little comment on self-compassion for health and well-being, would love to hear from you. That's it. I love the moderate stance with most things, because from working with hundreds of people, I find that in the beginning stages, when we're reteaching our brain specific habits, when we're getting our heads wrapped around a system, it's very important to understand the parameters of a system, whether it be a new work system, eating protocol, exercise protocol. To give it our best shot, we really do have to understand the rules. Once we understand the rules, it becomes we can move beyond the parameters, the strict parameters that it sets, for it to become a living, organic process that we are actually able to live and enact every day, that is filtered through our experiences of a human being. And with that comes the necessity for adaptation. Right, so lads, another one in. Fantastic. Thanks, Michael. Thanks a million. Great class once again. Much appreciated. Have a great day. Have a great day yourself, and thank you so much for the comments and feedback. I appreciate knowing I'm not just speaking into the void. So thank you for that, and have a lovely day, guys. I believe Andrew's back next week, and I will be there the week after. Enjoy your week, practice some self-compassion, see how it goes for you, and we will be chatting to you soon. Bye now.